Welcome to the Triple D Podcast, Donuts, Disability, and Discourse, where host Michael Liner talks to the best in the business about community, impact, business, and donuts. Here's your host, Michael Liner.
Welcome to another episode of the Triple D Podcast, Disability, Discourse, and of course, Donuts. We are back again at Corbo's in Little Italy in Cleveland, and I have a guest that I'm really excited about because there wouldn't be a podcast here, there wouldn't be a Michael Liner here if it wasn't for the person that I'm sitting across from. You didn't bring me into this world, but you kind of showed me the world in a sense, and I'm talking today to Dave Nager, who is a mentor and a friend, but the person who took a chance on a kid with a big mouth and hired me out of law school back in 2010, so quite a while ago. But I'm just so excited to have you here. Dave, do you want to tell us a little bit about your practice and, just give the audience a background before we start chalking it up?
Okay, well, first, thank you for having me and downplaying your own abilities, because you're here because of what you did, not because of what I did. I'll take very little credit for that. But, I am primarily an injury attorney with a major focus on workers' compensation. And my quick history, and I just want to say being here at Corbo's is really special for me, because in law school I lived in Little Italy with my girlfriend, who's now my wife. My first son was born when we lived here, and so it's always fun to come back to Little Italy. But back then in the 80s, I was in law school, and I took a job as a law clerk for a gentleman who had a personal injury workers' comp practice, and out of law school he took a chance on me and hired me. I like to say he taught me a lot of about the practice and the business. Some were positive examples and there were a lot of negative examples as well. It's learning what not to do is very important also.
It's just, and sorry to stop you, but it's so funny to hear you say that, because it's almost how I describe, piggybacking onto you. And I'm sure in 20 years, somebody will be inviting me onto their podcast and piggybacking onto me in the sense of, to me, law school was the 2.5 years or so that I worked in your office, because what I actually learned in law school, and I'm sorry to everybody who's, fighting to get in and paying heavy loans back right now, I don't use any of what I learned in law school right now. What I used was what I learned from sitting outside of your office at the beginning until you kicked me out and moved me down the street because I was too loud. But it just how to run a business, how to talk to a client, how to get a client, how to handle other attorneys, how to compose yourself. They don't teach you that stuff. You had to have the right mentor, the right situation.
And I agree. I happened to watch a very short blurb on some video went to my phone from whatever sources are manipulating us, and it was Neil deGrasse Tyson who was talking about how we all say the math I learned in high school was worthless because I'll never use it in my life, but it's really more like brain training and brain working out and a brain workout, and that's similar to what law school is. I think it teaches you a little bit to think like a lawyer, but to me, it was just a means to an end to get that degree and teach me how to pass the bar, which really it did, but also the bar review course did as well. And then, of course, it's all on the job training from there. You're literally thrown into shark-infested waters, and you just got to fight them off until you can become a shark yourself.
Tell me about your approach in law school a little more, because just knowing you, I know, you were a bartender through law school, trying to pay your own way to get by. You were married when you were in law school, and your son was born when you were in law school. But when it came to preparing yourself for the profession, were you focused on what you were learning there, or trying to take the steps towards building a career at that point?
I was definitely just trying to survive at that point. My wife and I were very tight in college, and we had decided to move home to our respective parents' houses while I attended law school in hopes of saving up some money and blah, blah, blah. And about 2 weeks later, she called me up and said, I can't live at home. And lo and behold, I had a buddy who owned some properties down in Little Italy, so we moved into a $250 a month apartment in 1987, and all of a sudden, instead of saving money, I had to go make money to pay the bills, and that's when I took a job with this solo practitioner who did take a chance on me. From there, I worked for him, and I switched to night school, and then I got married in law school in my last year. And when I came home from the bar, my wife looked at me and said, "I'm pregnant." And, I said, "Oh, shit," right? I won't tell you that we didn't have health insurance at the time. We had to make decisions on which bills we were going to pay. And being two young, healthy people, we let it lapse. So that was a whole another chapter to the story. But I called a buddy of mine down in the flats, and he gave me a job, and I started bartending on the weekends. And I was making more in 2 days than I made in the other 5 I was working in the law office as a clerk, because no raise was coming until I passed the bar. But I realized early on that this was an area that I liked, and it was near and dear to my heart because in 1990 my father was injured on the job and became disabled. It was the year I took the bar in July of 90. He became disabled in January of 90, and unfortunately spent the rest of his life on disability through workers' compensation. So I represented him and was able to get him what he was entitled to, and it really sparked me into this career. And of course, we can get into a few other things, but I realized, now with a family of my own, I had to go out and make a living. And so I was bartending and practicing law, and trying to gather as many clients up as I could.
So many of the things that have stuck with me, like there's so many like Davisms, I'd call them in my head, things that, you're always good for a fishing analogy, and that relates as that relates to the practice of law. You eat what you kill. Pigs get fed, hogs get slaughtered. So many Davisms that I've learned over the year from you, which are things that frankly became the bedrock for. And there's great principles in all of them. I want to do well, but I don't want to screw the people around me, because you never know when you're going to need a friend.
Don't bite the hand that feeds you.
Yeah, exactly.
But I didn't make up any of those.
Well, and that was my question. Did any of that come from the gentleman that you worked for to begin with?
No. But over the years, I've created some really great relationships. You're one of them, and I want to say before I get into this that a week or 2 or 3 or 4 weeks after we hired you, and I didn't do your first interview. It was 2 other guys in the office, Dan and Jerry, who are now running the firm, said, "Boy, this guy came in. He's a young guy. He's got this big idea." And at the time, we were building up a Social Security practice in addition to what we did. But I remember listening to you. Of course, you were outside my door, and you were talking to a client. You were talking him off a ledge. Somebody was not happy about something, and here's this guy 4 weeks into the office. I don't know if you were even 4 weeks into being an attorney. I can't tell you the dates. You knew the date. You know the dates better than I do. And I'm thinking, boy, he's saying everything I would say. This is perfect. Now, at the time, what was it, 2010? So I'd been out 20 years already.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, this guy's good. He's good, and he can only get better because he understands how to deal with people. Something they don't teach you in law school. That's just something that you either have or you don't have. So
I remember that conversation that I had with the client, because I wouldn't remember the conversation that I had with the client if the conversation that you had, because you came and told me, "Wow, I can't believe that happened." If you hadn't approached me afterwards, it would have just been any other client conversation. But it was a client who was upset that we got a fee because we won his case fast.
Yeah.
And
boy,
I remember my response was, would you rather we drag your case out, not work as hard, and make twice the money? Would you then feel justified? But then you don't have any money in your pocket for the next 1.5 or 2 years? And I would never remember that if it hadn't been just so significant to me that you kind of pulled me aside and said, "Wow." And there were so many things like that. I mean, I remember one time, it wasn't always positive, even though it's things we can laugh about now. Where I remember one time you found out that I was hanging those almost like dog wanted signs. I was cutting the little slips and leaving them in like Section 8 housing in Cleveland, trying to get calls. And not everything seemed funny at the time, because you were like, I'm trying to run a law firm here.
Right. I mean, it's trial and error.
Trial and error.
You got to see what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
And, if I could have all the money back on the errors I made, we wouldn't be having this conversation here.
Right.
We might be having it in Italy, not Little Italy.
Sure.
But that's part of the process. That's part of almost what's wrong with having a big firm now, because I was there washing the dishes and drying the dishes and making the dough and cooking the pizza and all those other pizza analogies. And I did make pizzas when I was in college down in the flats. So, but now people come in and they skip a lot of the steps. And so it's like, you're in this department and you're in that department. I used to sign clients up. I would drive out and meet them. I'd meet them at 2 a.m., 2 p.m., whenever and wherever they wanted to meet. I would go into neighborhoods that I don't know why I went into those neighborhoods. I would call my wife and say, if you don't hear from me in 15 minutes, call the cops, because I'm going into a bad spot right now. But I had to sign the business up.
So it's interesting, because I was always chasing this fear that I feel like I had, where there's another attorney who we both know who had a significant practice handed to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't say his name. I know you know who I'm talking about, but
you're talking about lots of people, but okay.
Right. But this particular person, one thing that you always admired the hell out of was, even though he never really had to work, probably, he went and set up a booth for himself at the Geauga County Fair, which is just a common county fair, but must have spent 3 or 4 days just smelling horse and pig shit, doing whatever he could to sign up clients. And that resonated with me so much, because I was fortunate. I didn't have the same struggle through law school that a lot of other students had, but I didn't want to be successful because my dad was successful. I wanted to be successful because I was out there hustling. And so many of the things that, the stories that you told me, that was the gold in working for you. It was following you, but then it was just listening to you and observing.
I appreciate that. And I will tell you, the guy that you're talking about is a good friend of mine.
Yeah.
And we're competitors, and it's nice that despite the fact that we're competitors, we are good friends. And I think there's a lot of mutual...
I think he lives right down the block.
He used to. He moved. He has he has a wife and a couple kids now. Yeah. And I was in Florida a week or two ago, and we had drinks together. Yeah. And his little daughter was there, and my little daughter, who's turning 27 in a couple days, was there as well. And so it was a really nice moment. But those are the guys I admire.
Yeah.
I know lots of guys who came from money, and I did not. But they're still some of the hardest working hustlers that I know, and that's what I respect, because I always say, in a room full of lawyers, I'm not the smartest guy, but no one's going to outwork me. And then I see this guy here who did have some nice pedigree, but he's busted his ass. And I have some other businesses I'm involved in as well, and one of them is the car business. And I know some of these young guys whose fathers own multiple dealerships and are probably worth tens of millions of dollars. And they're the best in the business, and they're the hardest working guys. Yeah. And that's what I admire, not the guy who's taken his father's practice and spent 25 years running it into the ground. And there are plenty of guys like that too. But, to be my friend, I think I have to respect you.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things. There's a lot of things I respect, but definitely hard work is one of them.
So, we've talked a little bit about your beginnings and, working through law school, and then entering this practice. But now, now you have, by a significant multiple, the biggest, practice of its kind in Ohio. And, you're kind of on that Mount Rushmore of Ohio, injury attorneys. But what are the decisions that you think if you think back and look back over, the last 3 decades, what are the decisions you made that helped you go from, just working nights as a bartender to how did you get here, Dave?
A lot of luck, a lot of help from friends and family. My disabled father would go and get his coffee and sit in a restaurant for 3 hours and make friends, and then all of a sudden some guy says he got hurt on the job or hurt in an auto accident, and Dad's passing out my card. I have a good friend of mine who I've known since the mid-'70s when we were kids, and he's still a good friend. He was at my wedding. I was in his wedding, sending me tons of business. Fast forward, his son clerked for us as a law student. So, and I think just a lot of hard work and sacrifice. You early on you mentioned fear, and I've come to the conclusion that I try to ask people every now and again, which my wife can't stand because she's heard it a million times. What's the one word that you need to describe what it takes to be successful? And I'll let you get 2 or 3 in it. People say hard work or brains or inherited. I don't know. And I'll say politely in a very non-offensive way, it takes intestinal fortitude. Okay? 40 years ago, or if you like Bill Burr, the politically incorrect guy, he would say it takes balls, right, to be successful. And really what it is, it's risk tolerance. Because there's a lot there, and I don't fault anybody for not having a high risk tolerance. There's some guys that are just, 30 years ago you would see a medical practice in Cleveland. They're all owned by the Cleveland Clinic or University Hospital now. But you'd see a doctor, you'd see 10 doctors, and 9 of them would get in a Mercedes or a BMW and drive home, to Rocky River on the west side or Pepper Pike on the east side. But one guy would drive to Moreland Hills in his Rolls Royce, and then he'd get on his private plane and he'd fly to Florida to his other house. And that was the guy who was the businessman doctor. He wasn't just a doctor. And he had vision, and he had the intestinal fortitude to suffer through the risks and maybe put up his own money when he had a wife and kids and he was trying to save for college or just pay his bills. And ultimately, I think that's what I did. I had 2 partners take over the firm last year. Yeah. And they were there for a long, long time. It's not as if they were not part of our success. I don't want to minimize their roles. But I said, listen, when I went to bed, I was afraid. And when I woke up, I was afraid. And fear is the greatest motivator in the world. But I wasn't frozen by fear. I was motivated by it. And I think that's the difference. So that to me is the biggest key to success. I mean, it's good to have brains. It's good to have vision. It's good to work hard. And I worked really hard. I went from bartending at night to just working at night, right? Yeah. I get text messages all the time and it said, "You're responding before I hit send." And I go, well, that's just how I've always been. So, whether it's 10 in the morning or midnight, it doesn't matter to me. I sleep better when I know the job is done.
I'm remembering back a decade now, but there were so many times when, just your personality traits where, you tell me if I wake up at 1 in the morning because I go to the bathroom, that's it. I'm up. I'm working. Or,
I wasn't bragging.
No, I know. And, I'd be working late and, you'd send me a message in the middle of the night that would say, go to bed. Mm-hmm. I'm like, you're up. So how can I be asleep when you're still awake? That never made sense to me. If I'm trying to improve upon what you're doing, I have to be willing to work at least as hard as you.
I think that's a great attitude and approach. I don't think many people embrace that, which is why, the name of your firm is Liner Legal. Yeah. And, it's not other names. And I know you have other people working there, and I don't want to minimize their roles. Yeah. But someone has to be up at 2. And that's why you're Liner Legal, and you're not still working at my firm, because that's what you did. And I admire that. But I'm not here to be judging everybody else, because
No.
we have lots of people in our office that want to come home and be with their families. My wife knew at 6 o'clock on a Sunday if we had dinner plans and I got a call and someone said, look, we have a horrific case and we've got to drive to Youngstown, and this has happened, and I won't drop names, but we have referral sources, and I would get picked up in 15 minutes and we wouldn't go out to dinner that night.
Yeah.
That's how I put 4 kids through college and paid our bills, and I wouldn't change any of that.
So, one of the things that I don't think I've ever told you this, but I really respect, and the fact that we're sitting here today having this conversation is evidence of it. But I remember, and it was like 2 or 3 conversations. It wasn't one conversation. Back in 2013, it was 10 years ago this year, when I told you we kind of made the decision that it made most sense for me to start my own practice and move out. And what I expected from you was what probably was a reasonable expectation for most people, which was some kind of bitterness.
Mm.
And instead of that, my first office was in your office. You asked me if I needed anything financially to get started. And those, I think that's, I guess where I'm trying to go with this is that when other people reach out to me for assistance, I always remember just the lack of animosity that you had when you could have felt a competitive. Listen, you're a competitive guy. I
don't like to lose.
I might not know. I could probably name on one hand people who are as competitive as you are that I actually know, and that's a compliment because I know a lot of people. But to me, it was always different. It always felt like you really just had my best interest at heart, and you saw that it wasn't going to work out for me long term to stay under, your tree. So you encouraged me and gave me the tools to go out and start my own, and that really meant a lot to me, and it still does to this day.
Well, I thank you for that. Of course, I think if you weren't you, it wouldn't have worked out. And so,
Sure.
But as far as the animosity thing goes, I can be a grudge holder.
Yeah.
I can be bitter, I can be angry, and if I always say, if you pick 100 people off the street, 99 of them will have something bad about me to say, but those 99 have probably never met me. I'm also very, very loyal. I have friends that I hang out with from elementary school, from college, and from law school, and from the profession. So, I've made friends along the way. But I would say I respected you. I was impressed by you. I admired you. And the fact that you call me a mentor is more of a compliment than me thinking I'm a mentor, because you've done very well, and you are doing very well, and you will continue to do very well. But my first boss and I, when I left, it was ugly.
Yeah.
And I've never forgotten that. We're Jewish, he and I, and you. And I remember I was calling because I don't want to get into too many details, but there were still some things I needed to get out of the office, and I was being prevented from doing it. And he said, "You'll get this, and then you'll be dead to me." And I said, "Well, then sit Shiva," but just which for my Christian friends is like awake, but get me my stuff. And you and I talked before this podcast. I bumped into him here and there, and there was a time. Well, when I left, he had gone through a divorce, and times were tough for him and the firm. It was a 2-man firm at the time, but when you negotiate, you generally start from either end and you work to the middle to a resolution. And as we were trying to figure out how I would stay, his offers kept getting worse. And I realized that, he was kind of pushing me out because he felt maybe I was too much of a financial strain. And then I bumped into him about 15 years ago, and he said, "Boy, I wish we could have figured out how to work it out." He was complimentary with a little undertone of maybe, I don't know, bitterness.
Yeah.
We're the largest workers' comp practice in Ohio, and he's still around. Anyhow, I said, "Well, you really kind of put your foot on my ass and booted me out." And he looked up and he said, "Yeah, I think that is how it happened." But I never wanted to be that guy. We had another attorney leave us who's a friend of mine. He left us within the last few months. I had lunch with him the other day. I'm not bitter. I mean, until I just think everyone's got to do what they've got to do to take care of themselves and their family.
Let me ask you this. So I asked you, and you gave a great answer in terms of, what you did right, or what are the traits that you have that you think helped you get to where you got. When you look back, what do you think you've done wrong? Or what do you think maybe, to ask it another way, what do you wish maybe you had done sooner?
I'm sure I passed on in fact, there's been a couple attorneys, just because the timing wasn't right, that we didn't bring into the firm. But I think we've strategically, I wish I would have maybe gone out on my own a little earlier. I was 8 years practicing before I went out on my own, but I feel that there's stages in your career, and maybe I needed those 8 years. And probably there's a few, I wouldn't call them enemies, they might call me their enemy, that I wish I had a better relationship with professionally.
Yeah.
I always say we're hated by our competition, but we're respected by our opposition. And, the guy we mentioned, who shall continue to remain nameless because it's you and me on this podcast and not him, I'm really glad we're friends. And I have a lot of admiration for him. He's about 10 years younger. I don't know. Professionally, I wish there were a few more people I could have done better with. But that competitiveness has kind of forced me into me versus him situations, or me versus her, or me versus them, and me being my firm. So,
do you think that me versus him, has it ever bothered you? Are there relationships that you wish you could change, or
the professional ones are, it's my wife, who I've been with for 38 years. And when people are falling right, and when relationships are falling apart right and left, and you're kind of just dodging it and working through it for almost 4 decades, that's special. So, those are the important relationships. My kids, I used to think raising children that were successful was the most important thing. And, you say you want them to be more successful than me, right? But the truth is you want them to be good people. And now that I have 4 adult children, they're all really good people. And they're doing fine, but nevertheless, I'm really happy that. So those are the relationships that are important to me.
So now that your kids are, they're all out of the house, they're all grown. Your son just got married. I mean, your family has expanded. I mean, when you look back and think about it, what was it like? And this is something that I struggle with, because I've got 2 small children, but I work a lot.
And I'm going to listen to you, but my one son plays college baseball, and I have to see if there's any score on his game. They have a doubleheader today. So, okay, gotcha.
So,
sorry. They're winning.
Excellent. There you go. Perfect example.
That's right. I'm always on call.
What was it like for you balancing being a dad with growing a business?
I literally don't know how I did it. I was coaching rec ball, travel ball. Believe it or not, I played ball. I played softball and hardball until I was almost 50. And the only thing I had going for me was the city rec director was a buddy of mine. So I'd say, look, you got to schedule all my little league games on Tuesday, Thursday, because I'm playing Monday and Wednesday and another thing, and then tournaments were on the weekend. I don't know how I did it. I mean, I had a friend of mine, a dad whose son played ball with my son, and he had another daughter who was in an accident. When they came in for the settlement distribution, they were with one of my partners, and I walked in to say hi, and he says, man, I remember when the boys would play basketball, you would sit in the corner with your boxes of work. I didn't coach basketball. He said, I remember when we go to baseball tournaments and everyone pulled their luggage out of the van and you would pull bankers' boxes of files out. This is, before I had access to remote work all the time. And they would go to the bar after the games and I'd go to my room and do the work. Back in the 90s, we would take vacations down in Florida, early 2000s, and I had a much smaller practice, a real small practice back then. I think it was just 2 lawyers, and now we're almost 30. And I would have my secretary fax me to the post office in this little community that we went to, my mail every day. And there was no such thing as it. The joke was, my vacations, I'd work 8 hours a day. right? Now my vacations are, I don't take my phone when I walk on the beach. That's my biggest sacrifice right now. Because my wife would say, we talk, and what did you do today? Oh, we walked on the beach. Well, he didn't walk on the beach. He was on the phone for an hour and a half while we walked on the beach. You didn't even hear the waves. So, that's my big sacrifice. And I'll be 60 this year. So that was my my 6th decade sacrifice.
And now that you've made that commitment to actually walking on the beach and not being so tied to your phone and work for at least some periods of time, what's important to you in terms of like legacy and thinking about, what do you want people to think about you? What are you trying to do to make sure that your, the footprint that you created stays there?
So I would say, and I've thought about it, my name is still first on the letterhead. And on January 1st of 2022, I stepped down as managing partner. It's Nager, Romaine, and Schneiberg, and now Dan Romaine and Jerry Schneiberg are the co-managing partners. And they were the right people I got us to a level, and it got to a point where at my age, and not being as technologically savvy as them, I needed other people to take us to the next level. So the legacy is to continue to grow, continue to do good for our clients, which I really think we do. I don't think there's anybody who does it better. And I will say, when clients call up and they say, well, what about this other guy or this other guy or that other guy? I say, listen, I'm not going to tell you we're better than anybody. I've never tried to dog anybody else. I just say there's nobody better than us. The guy we talked about, he's good. And if I didn't get a case, I want him to get a case because I know he'll take care of that client. So the legacy is to continue to represent the working man and protect them from the big bad corporation or the big bad governmental agency. I already look now at not who the next leaders are, because they're already in charge, but who the next leaders are and the next leaders. And we're trying to target those people. We have them at the firm, and I'm really excited about it. Hopefully they'll stick around, but if they don't, hopefully they'll start their own practice like you. I welcome competition.
Yeah.
That I thrive on it, but hopefully they'll stick around and they'll be the next generation of leaders at our firm.
Well, it's been a great conversation as always with you, but it is the Triple D podcast, the third D being for donut. So
I've been looking at these things for the last half hour.
Well, you said you hadn't ate today, so
I have not eaten
this
today.
has to have been the worst game we could have played, is just making you stare at a donut while we talked for half an hour. You did tell us that your favorite kind of donut was a chocolate covered. I think you wanted cream filled. We got you custard, but we'll do our best here. I'm going to do a cheers with you. We'll taste it together.
Salute.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm. That's pretty good.
That's very good. Mm. This is my breakfast and lunch.
I tell you, when I think about Corbo's, the first thing I always think about is cannoli. And I'm not sure that I've ever had their donuts until today. This donut and the donut that I had earlier are maybe like two of the best donuts that I've had anywhere ever. So thank you, Corbo's, for having us, and thank you, Dave, for being with me here today. I'm going to hand you some napkins.
Thanks for listening to the Triple D podcast, Donuts, Disability, and Discourse. Rate, subscribe, and tune in next week for more Discourse and Donuts.